So I want to welcome everyone to what I hope to be a very informative webinar. And I have my husband, Barry, full disclosure, is my husband, and he's going to be on the panel to weigh in on financing with condos. And so the purpose of this webinar is to discuss the new changes in the Florida law regarding condos and safety, and to demystify I'm just going to tilt your down a little bit more. I see your fingers. You look like you're playing the piano over there, Barry. To demystify what all of this means moving forward. So let me do this. I'm going to share my screen. And you should be able to see now my presentation and slideshow. And we will start to discuss what you need to know about condos in today's market, new laws that affect condo owners, buyers, and financing. So let's go to a little history here. In 1974, Florida adopted legislation requiring that all local governments would adopt and enforce a minimum building code to ensure a minimum standards are met. And because the state was limited in scope, the local governments could amend and enforce the local codes. But then along came Hurricane Andrew in 1992. I don't know if any of you were here during Hurricane Andrew, but I certainly was. And at that time, it was supposed to have been the first day of school for my children, which of course didn't happen. And back then, hurricane protection amounted to putting masking tape, believe it or not, making these big masking tape webs all over our windows. And after the hurricane was over, which we weren't really affected here in Boca Raton, but of course the devastation was in Homestead, Florida, we created this ball of tape, which for several years, my kids used to like to kick it around and play with it. But the point of Hurricane Andrew is it demonstrated that the Florida's system of local codes did not work. They weren't able to oversee what needed to be done, and these structures were easily destroyed that were supposedly built to the strongest code. So in 1998, a single state building code was adopted by the legislature, and the state was now to oversee the local code enforcement as an umbrella. And at a very brief time, and it was like in 2008, there was mandatory inspections required by the state, but it didn't last very long. It was, by 2010, they had dissolved it. In 2000, legislature authorized the implementation of a Florida building code. And so moving forward, currently, the Florida Building Code in 2020, which is the current and 7th edition. And then, we've evolved to that point. So next slide is, so why the new condo laws now? In 2021, as we know, unless you were living under a rock, the terrible tragedy that happened in Surfside in Champlain Towers South, which was a 12-story building. It had 136 units, 101 residents were present at the time it collapsed, resulting in 98 deaths. Only 3 people survived. And at that time of the collapse, Champlain was actively undergoing a 40-year recertification. And in Florida, they did not require recertification of buildings or regular inspections, with 2 exceptions. That was in the 1970s, Miami-Dade had a recertification requirement. And in 2006, Broward County also joined that, and it was amended that the local building code requiring the recertification process and inspection for buildings 40 years or older went into place, and there was a 10-year recertification interval. So clearly 40 years was way too long for the building. They were undergoing all of that recertification, and that was what promulgated these new laws. And something that's pretty interesting are the statistics on the number of condos. Was really blown away by this, that over 1.5 million condos are in the state of Florida, operated by almost 28,000 associations, and almost 1 million units are at least 90 years in age. Now, I'm sorry, 30 years in age, not 90 years in age. Maybe some of the owners are 90 years in age. So the, gravity of the fact that you've got about 2 million residents occupying condos that are over 30 years in age. So you can understand how important safety would be. And in average, there's about 2.2 persons live in each unit. So the new condo, and this also applies to co-ops, inspection reform law that's required for multifamily residential buildings, and it's called SB 4-D, Building Safety. It's a full 88 pages, like 88 piano keys. It's a very long bill. And the purpose of this condo bill is to establish if the condo is in compliance with the Florida Building Code. And it affects buildings 3 or more stories. It was unanimously passed in the House and Senate and signed by Governor Ron DeSantis May 26th of 2022, and it went into effect last July 1st of 2022. And there are deadlines, important deadlines and benchmarks to be aware of. So the last January, which has already passed, January 1st, there was a deadline to provide information to the Division of Condominiums, which would include the address and county where the building is located, and the number of buildings, and if they're 3 stories or more, and the number of units. And the 3 other deadlines, and remember this date because it's December 31st, 2024, that number is going to stick in your head. That's the deadline to complete what's called the mandatory milestone inspection if the building is 30 years or older. And the other deadline on the same date is called a complete structural integrity reserve study, also known as SIRS, S-I-R-S is the acronym. And also on December 31st of 2024 is the prohibition against waiving or reallocating the use of reserves begins. So you can no longer vote down the Florida statutes, which previously many, many boards did this, either reduced or removed the allocation or reserve funding. So that's no longer allowed to be done. The milestone inspection comprises 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. And it's required if the certificate of occupancy issued on or before July 1st of 1992, which would put it into 30 or more year old buildings. And it must be performed before that deadline of December 31st, 2024. So this inspection must be conducted by a licensed Florida architect or engineer. Again, it applies to buildings 3 stories or higher. And the frequency, so there's a little bit of difference in the age. If you're within 3 miles of the coastline, like I am here, I'm on the ocean at Sable Point, and actually we're built in 1965, the first building built on the ocean in Boca Raton. We would have to have inspection every 25 years. And if you're greater than 3 miles, it's every 30 years. And the reinspection must be done every 10 years. And the official records are to be kept for 15 years. So phase 1 must begin within 100 days after the association receives a written notice from the local enforcement agency. So if you're in Boca Raton, for example, it would be the city. And if your condo outlies into the county in the unincorporated areas, it would be the county. and it will consist of a visual exam of the habitable and non-habitable areas, so common areas and units, and to check for structural distress. So structural distress, the criteria would be cracks, distortion, sagging, excessive deflections, which is a change of the shape due from loads, significant misalignment, signs of leakage or peeling of finishes. And if there's no signs of the above, you do not need to have phase two. If you fail it, you go to phase two. It's like kind of like Monopoly, go and collect $200. So phase two, the purpose is to confirm that the building is safe for its intended use, or to recommend a program for fully assessing and repairing damaged portions of the building. And what's important to know is, the state governs the local agencies. However, the local agencies are empowered to adopt deadlines when necessary. Actions must be completed, but it cannot be longer than 365 days after receipt of the report. So after they get the report, they've got 1 year in order to comply. And the criteria for this inspection would be the evidence of, and this is a word that's, quote, substantial structural deterioration from phase one inspection. So the licensed architect or engineer must have a minimum of 5 years experience designing structural components and 5 years experience inspecting buildings of similar size, scope, and type of construction. So if a licensed inspector is not used to or hasn't had experience working in a particular project, maybe they've inspected low-rise buildings and this is a high-rise building, or maybe single-family homes, that would not qualify them. And this type of testing may involve destructive and non-destructive testing. So until you get into the guts or, remove some of the material, you may not really know what lies beneath. Slide 10. So the completion of the milestone inspection reports, which is phase one and phase two, at the end, the engineer or architect has to do the following. They have to submit a sealed copy of the inspection report to the building owner, the condo or co-op board, and the local building official, to be distributed to all unit owners via mail, email, and published on a website if the association is required to have a website. The milestone inspection report, the official records need to be maintained by the association, and any structural or life safety reports are provided by the seller for the buyer and tenant review. So in other words, seller is obligated to, if requested by a buyer or tenant, to receive this information. And the required local enforcement agency review, that's required, and to determine if the building is safe for occupancy if the association fails to submit proof that the repairs for the substantial deterioration have been scheduled or begun within at least 1 year after the local enforcement agency receives phase two's report. The additional purposes of the report is not just for safety reasons, but to provide recommendations on any remedial preventative repairs for damaged items that are not considered substantial structural deteriorations, and also determining and just describe and identify any items that need further inspection. So, it's like kind of like when you're doing home inspection, they're going to tell you what you need to do, what you need to prepare for. So the next phase or part of this law is a mandatory reserve study. It's called the Structural Integrity Reserve Study, also known as SIRS. And think of reserves as money for a rainy day and put aside in a piggy bank. And in the past, and I've heard this described very well, someone had said, we've kicked the can down the road. And what's happened now is that we can no longer vote down the Florida statute. Many boards, including ours here, would vote at the meetings to vote down to fully fund the reserves. And we had the right to do that. And so unfortunately, the chickens have come home to roost, and that's no longer something that we're able to do. So the purpose of the reserve study is for the future major repairs or replacements of common areas based on a visual inspection performed by, again, a licensed engineer or architect. However, any qualified person or entity may perform the other components of the reserve study. And the scope of it would be, this is the minimum scope, the roof, the load-bearing walls, floors, foundations, fireproofing and fire protection, plumbing. So many of us have cast iron plumbing in our buildings, especially the older buildings. Electrical systems, making sure they're not outdated, waterproofing and exterior paint, windows, and any other items of deferred maintenance or replacement cost that is greater than $10,000 as identified by the engineer or architect inspection. And the study must state the estimated useful life and the replacement costs or deferred maintenance for each item, and recommend an annual reserve amount for the estimated replacement costs or deferred maintenance expense by the end of its useful life. This must be performed every 10 years. And once again, official records for 15 years. So reiterating that December 31st, 2024, you're going to remember that date, owners may no longer vote to waive reserves or use reserves or the accrued interest for any other purpose than intended. So you can't pool reserves anymore. It has to be the line items of each individual part. And it must be completed by December 31st for the association that exists on or before July 1st of 22. So this pertains to new construction. Developers must perform this study before turning the association over to unit owners. So who must comply with this new law? Well, the board of directors, the community association managers or management companies hired by the association. And it's also important to understand and know that the failure of the board of directors to have the milestone inspection and mandatory reserve study is a breach of the officers and directors' fiduciary relationship to the owners. And duties to fail willfully or unknowingly to have these inspections performed may result in possible personal liability. And, there could be penalties. The localities are given discretion to prescribe penalties for noncompliance. And in a severe case, the building could be deemed unfit for occupancy. So now what? There's going to be some future costs. There may be, and likely, special assessments for repairs and replacements, and this may be costly. The affordability for current owners or buyers may pose a potential hardship. So, what can an association or homeowner do in this instance to anticipate these changes? There's payment options to consider. The building can obtain financing. There's, all different ramifications in regards to that. An individual can take out a personal loan or home equity line of credit, also known as a HELOC. There could be short-term payments where an assessment is broken down. Maybe every other month they make an incremental payment. There could be quarterly maintenance increases to comply with fully funding the reserve deadline, which would start in January 1st of 2025. So it's really important as an owner or buyer to find out about the reserves, what has already been collected in the reserves. That will state that on your budget. How many more years of useful life for each line item? If a substantial number of years are left, the good news is the association doesn't need to collect the entire amount of years to build up the reserve fund. For example, if the estimated life of a roof is 20 years and it costs $1 million to replace it, because they'll, bring out the numbers to reflect with inflation what that might cost in the reserve study, you would need to collect $50,000 in this instance for each year if the roof is 5 years old. There are 15 years left of useful life, okay, if the roof is 5 years old, which would make the need for $250,000 to add to the reserve if nothing was collected. So in buying a condo as a realtor, it's important to know what you need to obtain, what you need to know. The buyers, by law, receive a 3-day right of rescission, and the buyer is entitled to request from seller at seller's expense what's called the condo docs. The condo docs are comprised of 3 items: the articles of incorporation, which was when the condominium was established, the bylaws, and the declaration of condominium. And the declaration really is the meat and potatoes of the documents. And one of the things you will want to also obtain is the most recent year-end financial statement. This, like, for example, you would ask for the 2022 audited 12-month financial statement. It's pretty lengthy. It's the balance sheets. And also you would want the most recent approved budget. Something that's overlooked frequently is the frequently asked question, also known as FAQs. And they must be updated annually. And I can't tell you how many times I've encountered associations, even very sophisticated, expensive buildings where might be a smaller building and the property manager is not aware that this is something that's required. I'm always happy to provide the associations with what's approximately 7 questions. And because the documents don't have this information necessarily, because people aren't necessarily going to read through maybe 100 pages, and it wouldn't update things such as pending lawsuits or special assessments, because that's a moving target that changes throughout the year or year over year. And so certain questions are answered, such as restrictions, again, special assessments, pending lawsuits, voting rights. You get 1 or 2 voting rights. Are you allowed to rent? What are the restrictions regarding, is it an all ages building or a 55 plus building? Are you allowed to have pets, etc.? You'll also want to get the rules and regulations. And not required, but highly recommended, is to obtain the last 12 months of board meeting minutes. I think I've been requesting these for my clients, and even when I take a listing, for at least 5 years, because many owners, especially in condos where typically maybe there's 30% year round and the rest of them are seasonal, it could be their second, third, or fourth home, they may not have attended meetings. And minutes contain vital information that's posted on the agenda, discussions on future assessments and building issues, and also votes on special assessments. And the great thing too today is, because of Zoom, we don't have to necessarily be in person at the condo building, and you can be anywhere in the world and be able to attend. And what recently, 2 days ago, was put into the new condo, it's a condo rider for the Florida Real Estate and the FAR Bar, which is the Florida Association of Realtors, and the, this is the Florida Bar legal, is the new contract states that buyers and tenants are entitled to receive the following. So this is written into the new rider that's attached to the contract. It would be a copy of the milestone inspection report, phase 1 and phase 2, and the copy of the structural integrity reserve study. So again, this is things that should be routinely asked for, and now they're written on these documents. So before we get to, I'm going to just say some final thoughts on the bill before I turn this over to Barry to discuss with you, what happens with financing with condos, especially with regards to how much down payment and with safety, et cetera. I want to leave you with some final thoughts on the bill. Some say the bill is a good start. Others praise it. Others say it's an overreach of government authority. And, the bill was unanimously approved by the House and Senate, and it went through very quickly. And it was, there's got a lot of gray areas. And the condo associations and the building managers are just now beginning to grapple with massive implications of the new law. But it's unlikely that this bill will go away. The bill has now become the time to pay the piper, senior moment for older buildings that reduced the reserves or never funded them. And there's likely going to be a burden on the engineers and architects. Will there be a backlog of a waiting list for the qualified inspectors as they race to get to the inspections, and beginning them and creating delays? There's only so many architects and engineers, and it's like a flood of them. So there's also things to think about, this discrepancy in the governing condo docs and new law regarding, for example, windows and budgeting. What is the responsibility of an owner in most cases? The majority of buildings do not own the windows, and they're not, responsible to repair, replace, or maintain. I happen to live in a building that's one of the rare ones where our building, back when they replaced the windows 23 years ago, turned the responsibility of ownership to the building. So the association is now collecting money to build up reserves for something that's the homeowner's responsibility to replace. So, stay tuned for that one. And I would say to look for possible glitch bills in order to provide clarity on these gray areas. I'm sure they'll be coming up with updates. The really good news about all this, and I know it sounds like, oh my gosh, look at all the things that are going on, but I think that because the safety of the building is paramount, and people want to know, especially when they're moving into a condominium, they may have to do renovations. They don't want to have to worry about, not only do I got to spend X dollars in, renovating a unit, but now I got to worry about the building. So I predict there'll be a big increase in the property values as buildings are now going to be in tip-top shape. There won't be a question of surprises happening. And, we're going to get through the growing pains. And, just like when you're pregnant and you go through labor pains, it's going to be worth it when you have that new baby. So I want to turn Barry over to present the financing. So I will move over to the next screen, and just let me know if everyone can see Barry.
Questions, can you hear?
Can everyone see and hear Barry?
Well, not really. I don't know if you can hear me. You want to move your screen over more?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I don't know, because that microphone's on. No, that's fine. That's fine. Oh, no, you're not. Okay.
There you go.
All right. Hi, everyone. So how much do I need to put down depends on the following. So if you're buying a primary home that you're going to live in year round, will be one amount. Second home or multiple homes, investment, if you're not living there or just renting it out. So there's two kinds on a condo. There's always a questionnaire when it comes to financing. There's a full review, which asks many questions and is much more substantial because the down payment's lower. There's a limited review, which is a questionnaire, but with a lot less questions, but you have to put down more money. So here's the differences. When you do a full review questionnaire, the minimum is 5% down. The full questionnaire on it, the reserves of the budget must be 10%. And if not, that would be a problem. The special assessment cannot be safety related. And you have to check with the condo association on the down payment, because there are some that'll say, I won't take 5% down in the bylaws. And I ran into one where you had to put down 20%. So that's something that's important. The lender's going to review all of the condo docs, including the financials, all the different condo things that we mentioned earlier. So there's quite a bit of documentation besides the questionnaire. The association's delinquency of the owners, meaning the HOA quarterly or monthly fees, cannot exceed 15% if they're behind. That's also a problem if that happens. Investment properties require a full review. They do not do limited reviews. So on a limited review, the primary home, you can put down 25%. You'll get usually a better rate, but you'll also have the limited questionnaire. On a second home, it's a 30% down payment, minimum, of course. One of the main things about the limited review questionnaire, it doesn't ask about reserves. Most of the time, if you're going to have an issue, it's going to be about the reserves, because in the past, many places on the beach, especially, and obviously Florida having a lot of condos, had very little, if any, reserves. So a lot of times when I do them, I do a lot of limited reviews, but I do full as well. Now, special assessment cannot be safety related, except there are two agencies that do loans that we're talking about: Freddie and Fannie. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Freddie Mac does not ask the question about the assessments. That's big as of right now. And they do not require all the condo documentation that we said before of the different condo docs, including the budgets and all that. On a limited review, they do not ask for it. Unfortunately, investment properties do not qualify. So that's pretty much it about financing, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any, either now or you can always call me later. I'm happy to answer anything. Thank you.
So I hope that this, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There we go. Okay. And I'm just want to let you know that I appreciate everyone coming to the webinar during dinner hour, and hope that you were able to enjoy your dinner. I know, Kathy, you had mentioned to me that you couldn't be heard in the chat. The chat is for if there's any questions. So if you do have questions that you might have, feel free to put them in the chat box, or if a question comes up after the webinar is over, feel free to contact me directly. I'm happy to answer any questions. And there might be other topics of interest to you that you would like to see us do in the future. So I'm open to suggestions. So thank you again. I'm Karen Anderson and Champaign and Precy Real Estate. And thank you, Barry, for providing your input on condos. And have a great evening, everyone. Thanks for attending.